Hello, my name is Connor Collister. I am the programmer for Epicness, and this is our game Candy Defense. So I'll start by showing my main approach to programming the game's core mechanics. So to start with, I will show the AI blueprints. Um, so Zombie AI right here is our main character that the player is in charge of killing using towers in the game itself. So basically, this is just the zombie AI blueprint. The spawner is where most of the functionality for the zombie AI comes in. There are quite a few functions here. This one basically handles all of the spawning dynamically, judging by the data for the wave that is spawned. This one is just basically checking the end of the wave, judging by how many zombies are still alive for the wave. This one basically just updates our spawn wave button for our UI, and this one creates the initial spawn wave button. And this one lowers the player's candy, meaning their player lives, if the zombie reaches the end of the level without being destroyed by a tower. So that's basically most of the functionality in the AI spawner. I'm going to move on to the tower blueprints. So the tower blueprints themselves deal with a lot of the targeting mechanics for the tower, as well as the shooting mechanics for the projectiles, and that's mostly it, as well as same idea as setting the zombie member data from the structure, the data table. It's the same idea with the towers here. So, like I said, most of it has to do with targeting functionality, which is probably the hardest part of the programming. Just figuring out how to basically maintain a list of targets depending on if the tower had a valid target, and if it did not have a valid target, or the target was destroyed or left the tower's radius, how it would select a new target and maintain a list of targets. Um, yeah, so this is pretty much what that does. This right here, check to see if it needs to find a new target. Over here, we have the actual shooting function. And then, yeah, like I said, this just sets the tower's visual data from the tower struct. And so yeah, as far as the shooting mechanisms, that's a good segue into the projectile class. So let me see. Let me pull up the projectile class real quick. Where did I put that? Tower projectile. Here we go. So this, the functionality in the actual projectile class itself is more to do with the target. I mean, the projectile actually honing in and following the its target, the zombie AI. So that's what this kind of represents here. And one of the challenging aspects for this was maintaining that trajectory if the actor was destroyed, meaning the target actor, not the projectile itself. So having the projectile still continue towards where the zombie was last known to be after it was destroyed. So this would occur when uh, basically a projectile would be following the zombie after while while it had been destroyed. So basically, two projectiles in the air. The first one destroys it. That second projectile, making sure it actually goes to that last location, doesn't just fly off into oblivion or disappear or anything like that. And then the damage application from the projectile to the zombie is programmed here as well. So that is the projectile class. I did create a struct as well for the projectile, but it more has to do with assigning the correct mesh for the projectile to each individual tower. So we have two different towers. I'll show that real quick. Actually, it's pretty simple. So here, this is just the tower struct, all the variables in the tower struct. But if I actually pull up the tower data table, you can see we have two different towers. Um, so it has a projectile member, particle member, tower mesh, the cost of it, the rate of fire of the tower, the range, the damage, and the name of the tower. And this just like using the structures and the data table type implementation made it super easy to change things for balancing, add new waves. And here I'm just showing the zombie wave functionality, so you can kind of see what wave number it is, the amount of health each zombie has, the speed of the zombie, how many zombies are actually spawned in each wave, the delay in between their spawn, if they reach the end of the level, how many lives do they actually take from the player, and if the player kills them successfully, this is the currency they earn from killing it, and then there's also a reward at the end of the wave if they complete the wave successfully too. So that is kind of our approach, or my main programming approach is trying to make it as dynamic as possible to add more waves, add new towers if you wanted. Um, yeah, that's pretty much was my general approach to programming. So now let me show the UI a little bit. So in the UI, I have a few widgets here. There's widgets for building the actual tower, so a couple buttons here. Um, to pull this up in the actual game, the player would press Q, and then they'd have an option of building a tower. Right here now, it just says bush or chair tower, just for fillers, but they're dynamically name changed, judging by the row of the data table that's plugged into them. So just showing the graph here, this kind of shows with the functionality of when a player actually clicks those buttons. So you can see if it clicks the cannon button, it'll reference the row name cannon in the data table and then set all the data for that. Same idea with the other one. And basically, if you wanted to add another tower type, you just put another on clicked here, set it by the row name, and then just plug it into this thing, and it would be dynamically allocated and created just from the data table itself. So here you can see the event construct from it. Same idea. And this just kind of appends the name and corresponding to the cost of the tower for the button. I can show that in the game real quick. So if I hit play, you can see it shows the name of the tower as well as the price here. That's sort of what that functionality is doing. Some of the other ones, I'll just show the general overlay widget real quick. So what this is basically keeping track of visualizing the amount of money and the amount of lives the player has left to them. And this is always displayed on the screen. As far as the actual programming aspect of it, it's just a couple bindings here. You can see this is what basically is always keeping track of how many lives a player has, and the same idea with the currency. It's just always keeping track of that. A couple of the other widgets. So the selected tower widget. So this one right here is basically when a tower is selected that's already placed in the map, they have the option to delete the tower. And what it does, it refunds 50% of the cost of the tower to the player. So say they aren't happy with where they put a tower, it still penalizes them for deciding to build a tower there, but it does give them some money back for doing that. And this is the code for that. And I can just show that real quick as well. So if I decide to build, say, a pumpkin cannon, I can then reselect the cannon, it shows the delete tower option, I delete it, it disappears, I get half the cost of the tower back. Once again, same thing with the candy corn, costs 100, I select it, delete the tower, get half the cost of it back. So that's sort of that functionality. The start next wave widget is how the player will uh, actually spawn the waves. So this button only displays when the player is in between waves, and it'll update that number. So right now it just says spawn wave 1, but after each wave it'll update that number for corresponding to what wave the player is on. It's pretty self-explanatory. Tower selection is, I think we already showed that guy. Yeah, the tower selection has to do with that. Has to do with actually building the tower. So basically, if the player clicks that, then they'll actually be able to place the tower down. And then I also have the winning and losing conditions just for the actual widgets to display on the screen here. Winning condition and the losing condition here as well. There's not really any code in here. It's basically just reference from the view for the viewport. And let me just show the winning and losing conditions as well and where those are actually located. So the losing condition is located in the actual game mode part right here. So what happens whenever a zombie reaches the end of the map without getting destroyed by a tower, it'll call this function, which will lower the player's lives. And within this function is actually a check to say, hey, are our lives less than or equal to 0, meaning we are out of lives? And if so, then it will actually trigger this losing condition here. And then the winning condition is actually within the AI spawner class. So the functionality that actually checks for the end of the wave and then spawns will basically create the new spawn wave button. And here there's a check to see, hey, is the next wave going to be more than the number of rows we have in that wave data table, meaning there aren't any more waves. And if that check is true, then that means the player had completed all of the waves in the game, and then it will call the winning widget to the viewport, and then end the game as well. So that's sort of how that works. I think that's pretty much everything I want to show as far as the programming side of things. I guess the last thing I can show is the player pawn here. Basically, what's in this functionality is, or what's in this class rather, is how the player interacts with the buttons. So basically, it's taking in the input of the clicks. It's if they're trying to place a tower, it checks the validity of the location. If they are selecting a tower, they're making sure if they select another tower, it switches over to it. If they click off the screen, it deselects the tower, things like that. And then last but not least, how the actual camera works. So I implemented a panning system. So the idea is basically if your mouse reaches the edge of the screen, it'll start to pan that direction. So that's what this massive function. It looks complicated, but really it's just a lot of location vectors being split. Um, and then also setting limits for how far the player can pan. So that's what this function right here represents. And I'll just show that real quick in the game, sort of how that works. So one or more blueprints. Did I adjust something? Huh. Must have adjusted something without realizing it. Okay. But it's already saved, so you can kind of see if I'm reaching the edge of the screen, it'll pan. Same idea if I reach the limit, which is right here. Same thing with all the other sides of the map. It'll hit those limits. I'm just showing you that all the buttons actually work. So if I spawn away, there'll be some zombies coming in right here. If I place a tower down, it'll fire the tower. The towers rotate, shoot the projectile, and you can see if one zombie dies, our currency is updated. If zombie reaches the end of the level, our candy goes down, just by how many lives that zombie took away. And see, that's the last one for the wave, so now we'll spawn the next wave, but and again, buy another tower if I have the money to do so, and see it subtracts that money. Spawn the next wave, and you see these ones just move a little bit slower, sort of that dynamic wave design, and we can just implement waves how we want. Yeah, so that is pretty much everything on my end. Thank you so much.